Giuseppe's dead, baby. Giuseppe's dead. If you think you liked Nutopia, you're going to love Nutopia II. It's kind of just more of the same after all. Fire rod, boom bombs, candlelit castles for romantic battles, armor upgrades, shields, Zelda-like qualities. Nutopia 2 is Nutopia 1 with added flair. Its differences make it different, but it's largely the same affair. Most of the added sprinkles land. Some tumble, but largely this is the same well-planned, tasty baked cake as the first. This time around, the world is a bit more linear and compartmentalized. You may be wondering how things could get even more straightforward than the first, since in that one the world was split into 4 worlds containing 2 objectives each. Well, this one might seem more open, but ultimately it still boils down to journeying here and sometimes over there to push the narrative and game along without a lot of room for improvisation. The new layout makes it feel less curated, but it's merely a facade. Speaking of story, this one's pretty unique this time around. The playable protagonist from the first, Giuseppe, has gone missing. You play as his son and are able to input your own name, a first for all action-adventure games since the beginning of time. The intro cutscene clearly showcases this rather well. I give Hudson Soft some credit for going this route in this 1991-92 sequel for the PC Engine Turbografx 16 respectively. So yeah, I mean, the story is fine, the world is fine, the combat is largely the same, with a few tweaks. Like the first game, most enemies get pushed back when struck, which allows for some breathing room and thoughtful planning in between attacks. The Flamefire Heat Rod has seen a bit of a downgrade, likely to balance it out. In Nutopia, the Flame Rod was a very powerful weapon. The more health Giuseppe had, the larger and more explosive it could be. Losing some life resulted in a smaller, arguably more controllable ball of flame. This flame could be cast at any time regardless if the player was mobile or idle. In Nutopia 2, the mechanics of the fire are the same, though this time around, if the player is moving, the projectile will magnetize enemies, which can be helpful if used appropriately, or hazardous. It's different. I guess it just kind of depends on how you look at it. Regardless, it is manageable. Another change is that the player can move diagonally instead of being locked into a 4-direction limitation. Good. I don't really have much to add to that. The Crypt Dungeon Palace labyrinths are a bit more interesting, but largely the same, with the exception being that of the 5th one, which is mostly reliant on hazardous traps and navigational puzzles to challenge the player. It's expansive, well-designed, extremely fun, and better than any dungeon crafted preceding A Link to the Past. Some of the main quest objectives are tossed across the overworld this time around, which breaks up the pace quite a bit. A couple mandatory bosses and plot-pushing MacGuffins are hidden behind some pretty simple overworld puzzles. Frankly, these experimental segments shocked me. They both occur in the latter quarter of the game and really shake things up. These events, as well as that aforementioned dungeon, completely changed my opinion of Nutopia 2. At first, I thought it to be quite a mediocre experience with only a few minor tweaks made to the original. However, the second half, and its surprises, proved how wrong I was. Boom bombs are now dropped more frequently. Life isn't, but that's fine as potions still exist. A lot of towns are around where vendors all live to serve you and charge you gold for saving the world. This time, all of these crooked item sellers exist in each town, selling bombs, medicine, upgrades. This is a big deal, people, as they were strewn about in the first title. Useless people still exist, as do those who give helpful hints. Destructible walls are still both in and out of dungeons, but the amount of bombs available make them a non-issue. Those of you who watched the first review in this series will know that the lack of explosives was my only tiny nitpick about Nutopia. In this follow-up, I never ran out of bombs. Boom bombs, that is. Honestly, this is as great a sequel as one could ask for, though it does stick very close to the original game. These days, that doesn't seem to be an issue, but in its era, developers and studios tended to experiment a bit more. Still, the changes made here are mostly good, and at the least, inoffensive. That's not to say it's perfect, though. I had some tiny issues with the collision detection both in combat as well as while trying to pick items up, but it didn't really ruin anything situational for me, and the music changes an awful lot in the overworld, which is good variety-wise, but it can be jarring when it switches 3 screens in a row. That last one is a nitpick and an excuse to segue into this game's music, which is on par, possibly better than the original Nutopia score. For more on that, check out our review of the first game and take a listen to our VGM 101 podcast, specifically the Not Zelda and pcengine episodes. Kaita Hoshi has taken the helm here with some great original pieces, as well as a lot of remakes of Tomotsune Maeno's work from the original. All around it sounds like more channels are being utilized, but that could just be me. Bottom line, Nutopia II sounds amazing, despite it being a touch too dependent on bringing back tracks from the first game. Enemies are as varied as ever, with more exhibiting a wider range of skillful movements. Plenty of them leap, some charge, a few can only be damaged by certain weapons. It makes for a slightly more dynamic challenge all around. The bosses are a lot more aggressive and quick, but as well detailed and interesting as those from the first game. A couple were a bit of an irritating chore, but they were welcome hurdles to overcome. Mostly. Nutopia 2 isn't a huge upgrade over the first Nutopia. A lot of music is the same, items are largely shared across both titles, and the enemies aren't all that different, but some of the new labyrinths are inspired, particularly the ones that lean a bit heavier on traps instead of enemies, and a few of the environments, such as this underwater section, are fun and interesting. I consider both of these titles to be pretty perfect action-adventure games and urge anyone with even a passive interest in these types of experiences to give them a shot. Nutopia 2, from me, gets an 18.49 out of 17.6380. So what are you waiting for? Go out and play some Nutopia!